Hi, welcome to the new view. And now I'm Norie Huddle. I'll be moderating today. And now introduce yourselves, please, so we know who's here.
Alanna Hartsock.
Ellen Brown.
Ginger.
Marilyn Langlois.
Wonderful. Well, today we have some interesting topics and that are very hot in the news. And we're going to start by looking at what's going on in the Ukraine and in Russia with what that whole brouhaha that's forming there and looking pretty wild. Would someone like to start by making some kind of a generic comment and then we can unpack it from there?
Well, so I have read that it's a distraction, basically. I mean, the COVID narrative is falling apart. And there are all kinds of facts that are coming out, and the mainstream media is now acknowledging things that have been censored for the last 2 years. Some of our favorite commentators on the other side have been knocked off of YouTube and just generally censored for saying things that are now being acknowledged in the COVID arena. And meanwhile, all the attention is on the Ukraine situation. I could say a lot more about that, but I'll pass it out.
I mean, we can segue later into the COVID narrative and how that's crumbling, as you very rightly point out. Why don't you tell us how is the mainstream media puffing up the situation in the Ukraine and Russia so that it will distract people sufficiently?
I'll start by giving some thoughts, and then maybe at some point Alanna can share with us a cartoon that she had. What we see in our Western media is just, everybody's upset and shocked and how horrible Russia is and how awful this invasion is. And I just want to say, I do not favor invasion or military action at all. I'm a total peace activist on all sides. However, what our media is not telling us is the context of the lead up to this and the role played by the CIA in Ukraine for decades. Douglas Valentine has written about this in his book, The CIA as Organized Crime. We've had our operatives there since World War II. And then the CIA was involved in the coup of 2014 that deposed a democratically elected leader and put in their chosen person, and with the intent of bringing Ukraine into NATO and putting the possibility of US weapons and military bases right on Russia's border, which is rightfully seen as a provocation, not to mention the fact that the population in the east of Ukraine was not at all happy about this coup, and the Russian-speaking population there has wanted to break away and form independent states, but they've been relentlessly attacked and shelled for the last 8 years. The US and the West have been supporting a regime that is very, very undemocratic, shall we say, in that it's really going after, it's been persecuting Russian-speaking populations right and left. This is all part of the picture that we're not getting. And as we morph our discussion further down the line, let's just remember the CIA is a common denominator in both the Ukraine situation and the lead up to the COVID scam.
Thanks, Marilyn. That was good.
That's great, Marilyn. A question for you. Do you see any kind of bigger picture of what's going on here in terms of the US's agenda?
Well, the US is clearly fighting a proxy war here, similar to what we've been doing in Syria. We haven't sent our actual troops. We haven't been sending bombers. Well, I guess we have done some bombing in Syria, but we haven't actually committed direct military intervention. But we've been sending weapons. We've been supporting overtly and covertly. And clearly, the whole idea is to switch the geopolitical balance, and they want to get Ukraine into NATO. There's already been expressed for many years an intent to get Georgia into NATO, and you can bet dollars to donuts the next will be Belarus, that they want to have a coup there and put Belarus into NATO.
They already tried a coup, I think. It didn't work. This just reminded me of it. It was a podcast that was done on Project Camelot, in 2010. And it was an interview of a man who was a banker in London, a London banker, and he was invited, he thought by mistake, to a Masonic meeting that was more high level than he was. So they were talking about the plan, and what they said was that they were behind schedule on the plan, and that first China would catch a cold, which meant, a virus, and that then they would set off a minor nuclear war between Israel and Iran, and that the US would come in on the side of Israel, and China would come in on the side of Iran, and it would wipe out 50% of the population. And that was the goal, because, the whole eugenicist thing, overpopulation, et cetera. So, and meanwhile, the elites would go underground. So when they wanted to wipe out a good portion of the population, because they're anticipating some global event that we're not aware of, but some disaster. I don't know if it was a comet going to hit or what, but something was coming in the future that would be, breakup, that would be quite devastating. And when they came back out of their foxhole, or their, whatever they have underground, that they didn't want to have to deal with a lot of starving hordes. So they wanted to save certain genetic portions of the population and not others. But it seems to me, so obviously they didn't, so China did catch a cold. We certainly saw that. And, or I'm so sorry, I think I've got it in reverse. I think first it was supposed to be this modified nuclear war, but they didn't manage to, Israel and Iran did not get into a limited nuclear war. So now that looks like what's happening in Ukraine. They're really pushing for war. It looks like they're pushing for war. I mean, yeah, anyway, that's.
That has been our US foreign policy for quite a long time. It's called full spectrum dominance. Used to be able to look it up and see articles online. I think they took most of them down. But
I
the
think they're
elites that
hiding.
pardon, they're hiding, that control
hiding their
US foreign
purpose.
policy, which rarely has any engagement or involvement by ordinary people. We're never asked by our Congress people on our input. So there's very little interest, let alone any real knowledge about US foreign policy. So we get ourselves into these messes by these Wetiko psychopathic personalities that have a lot of power and control and impact. And they are wanting full spectrum dominance and elite rule system. So anything that starts threatening that, like a multipolar world, which we're inevitably headed towards with Russia and China. And the more we do against Russia, the more we create the unipolar world, because Russia aligns with China. So Ginger.
Yes. What I'm looking at here, and there's all of this intrigue, there's a strategy, there's all of these plans, and they're moving them forward. I think that when back in 2010, they didn't realize the power of the media control that they were going to be able to have. And I think the role of the media right now with Ukraine is kind of critical, because the role of the media with COVID has not really they haven't been able to follow through completely and get everybody lined up, circling the wagons against the unvaccinated. They haven't really been able to fully do that. But I think they're trying to circle the wagons and get everybody unified against Russia now. And because there's a lot of business opportunities with Ukraine that they want to still do. There's a lot of money stuff going on there. It's always money anyway. And there's oil and so on. And they want to bring down Russia in some way. And this is a great opportunity to get the American people just fiercely antagonistic to Russia. And everything about Russia is bad, and everything about Ukraine now is good suddenly. Now, as one of you posted, now the Nazis, yeah, there we go. Now the Nazis in the Ukraine have been allowed back on Facebook, whereas the neo-Nazis in America are terrorists are not allowed, right? It's like the bad guys that are on our side are good guys. And I think they're rewriting this whole script just to keep everybody polarized. Yeah, this cartoon is really spot on. You know, the Russian man bad. That's right. And anything to do to say, look over there, nothing to see here. Look there, look there, look there. And we're totally there for Zelensky. We're totally there for and totally not pointing out how Zelensky they've been attacking the Russians that are inside the Ukraine. And there's these scenes that have been taken down, of course, of the Russian population inside Ukraine, putting together Molotov cocktails to try and fight against the onslaught that they are expecting from the Ukrainians.
Does anyone want to comment on the role of the Crimea here and the historical relationship of the Crimea and what the importance of the Crimea in this?
I think you're the one that's going to comment on that one.
Sounds like you're the one that knows.
Well, I've looked at it a lot too, so Norie and I could both.
Go for it, Alanna.
Okay, Crimea. Okay, when the Maidan happened, the big revolution, you know, and really we know who was behind that. Marilyn mentioned the CIA, but there was the Victoria Nuland, our Assistant Secretary of State. Remember that recording that got out? She was talking to our ambassador to the Ukraine, and they were deciding who would replace the president. They decided they would replace him with Poroshenko. And then Victoria Nuland said, ignore, she used the F word about the Europeans. We want Poroshenko. So our State Department and our CIA was behind this shift. And when the revolution happened, it started kind of as a non-violent protest in Kiev. But then we had the neo-Nazis in there pushing, and they started the fires, and they started the destruction. Now, what it has to do with Crimea, is the people in Crimea that have tended to be more Russian oriented anyhow, started seeing this horrible violence happening in Kiev and other cities, and it was moving down into the Crimea area. So with the Crimea having the Sebastopol, the Russian seaport there, they asked the Russian sailors to come out from their barracks and protect them. In fact, they're putting up statues now of the Russian soldiers in honor and appreciation of the protection they provided to Crimea. Then Crimea people had a democratic vote. It was about 95% voted to ask Russia if they would take them back to Russia, if they would annex Crimea into Russia. Then the Duma, Russian parliament, had a democratic vote, and they decided, yes, we will do so. We will take Crimea back under Russia's umbrella. So, hey, it was done very democratically. And it's always in the West, it's talked about how he's a land grabber and how he took over Crimea. Total lies.
Crimea has a very long history as part of Russia, and it is the one warm water port in Russia, which is a critically important piece of the geography here. And also, you're absolutely correct that the way this has been played ignores all the legitimate reasons that, I mean, what I keep thinking of is, here you have Russia that's surrounded by all these countries that were part of were part of the Soviet Union that have now become independent countries. And you had during Glasnost, you had, which president was it? George Bush sat down with Gorbachev and said, you know, we will, and Gorbachev wanted a clear agreement that NATO would not move eastward, and was promised NATO would not move 1 inch eastward, which is one of the many unfortunate lies that our government has told. It's a very self-serving way of acting, that to say something that will get the agenda that they want in the moment, which was to end the Soviet Union and to open it up in this new Russian Republic. break off all these satellite countries. And now what's NATO doing? They're going around one by one, attempting to pick off each of these countries surrounding Russia. And it would be a little bit as if, say, China and Russia together would go around to Mexico and to Canada and to the Caribbean countries and basically say, want to be part of us? We're creating a new alliance. What would we do? I mean, look what we did in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963. We went totally ballistic when Cuba had these missiles coming in. This is pretty much comparable to my mind. And I can understand why Putin is now saying, stop, you guys have lied. And if I read through his entire speech that he gave, which was characterized in the New York Times and other rags as being he was being crazy, and that it didn't make sense. But, if you read it, he's stating quite reasonably what his concerns are. Exactly. And I believe that there is a way that we now have got a bit of an opportunity because of some of the factors. China has not jumped in to support the Russians as people were saying they would. And you have the NATO countries, while they're sending materiel and personnel in the direction of the Ukraine, they are saying that NATO is not going to get involved. So there's a moment here that's very pregnant where I think that it's possible to do an intervention. But not only this, there's an intervention needed for the immediate firestorm that we want to avoid. But there's a much larger issue that I think is being ignored here. And actually, I would love to hear comments from each of you on this and how you see it. And that is, just recently, the international, what is it called? The IPCC, the Program on Climate Change, has come out with a very dire report saying we have an extremely narrow window of opportunity before we will have the very worst case scenarios devolve, shall we say, of climate change. We're having massive droughts in some places. We're having massive flooding in other places. We're continuing to cut down trees all over the planet. We're continuing to do things that are really stuck on stupid. And it seems to me that we're going to, that in the interest of this little battle here, which it really right now is, which is the Ukraine and Russia, we're going to lose the big war, and we're going to go into even further into the sixth mass extinction event, where the last one 66 million years ago killed off 75% of all life on Earth. So that's the big one. And I think that we need to, that there's an urgent need for those of us who are holding this new view, and I think there are lots of us out there now, that it's really, really time that we come together and create what I've been calling the Great People's Reset. Any comments?
Lots of comments.
There's Ellen, there's Marilyn.
Well, I'd like to comment on what you said, just a little. Go ahead, Marilyn, I forgot my comment.
Okay, I'll start and then you can come after me, Ellen. Just the bit about the climate crisis. One thing I want to say is all of these great powers go on and wring their hands about the climate crisis, and then they spend billions upon billions of dollars on armaments, weapons, military. That's one of the biggest polluters of the world. We got to cut out, all of these US Army bases around the world, the weapons, that's got to go number one. So I think that's incredibly hypocritical to say, we're worried about that when our leadership obviously isn't, because they're the biggest offenders. And then just to carry the hypocrisy on other levels, as has been said, we in the US already have so much blood on our hands from grossly illegal interventions with zero provocation to us, in Iraq and other places. Also about the breakaway, you mentioned about Crimea. Yes, the people voted on that, and let's look again at some other cases of people wanting to break away, and the U.S. was happily welcomed that in East Timor and in Kosovo. Kosovo broke away unilaterally from Serbia, and the U.S. welcomed that because they were our strategic allies, and we now have one of our biggest military bases in Europe and Kosovo. So there's all of
Where's
that.
music coming from?
Yeah, so there's all of that hypocrisy. And clearly the best solution is turning Ukraine into a neutral, country like Austria and Switzerland. Neutral country, at the best, like Costa Rica, neutral country, no military at all, with good economic relations with all parties. But get rid of all that military stuff, for sure.
Well, how is that going to be done? I mean, it's a little bit like the Aesop fable of who's going to bell the cat. Remember
Well, I think the Russians are pushing for that. That's, we get so many different reports in the news. You can't, our media says the Ukrainians are valiantly defending. I'm getting other reports on alternative media and people who are in the country saying, no, the Russians are succeeding. They've decimated the military infrastructure there. They've encircled strategic cities, and the purpose of the ongoing talks that are happening is, Russia's going to push and speak the only language the West understands, which is force, and say, look, we've got to get Ukraine to be neutral in some format. Maybe the East will have those separate republics. Maybe it'll be divided to the West, but there's got to be this neutral buffer. And that's what Russia is pushing for. And I think that's a very reasonable solution. And they may achieve that just through their military force that the West doesn't actually want to deal with.
Ellen, did you want to comment?
Well, I was going to comment on what triggered this current war. I saw one commentator say it was triggered when Kamala Harris was sent over to Europe to a some sort of security conference. I'm not, I think it was in Germany, but anyway, and said that Ukraine should join NATO. And
Yes.
Just so the question is, I mean, obviously she's not a foreign internationalist specialist. So the question is why she was chosen to be sent there. But anyway, we seem to have done all sorts of diplomatic blunders for quite some time. But Marilyn, you're doing a much better job than I am. I'm afraid this is not my area of expertise. But
Does anyone want to comment on the biolabs? I'm hearing reports of biolabs all over the Ukraine. Has anyone followed up on that?
We've all been seeing the maps, about 12, 13 biolabs that are apparently funded and controlled by the United States. I can easily believe that, just knowing how many biolabs are in the United States. I live 40 miles from the biggest one, which is in Fort Detrick. And some of us know the role that played in the anthrax attacks after 9/11, the anthrax letters that members of Congress received. And this is another one of these absolute criminal activities that we are paying for. Why are we producing things that kill people? And that's across the board. The murdering, the killing, and our tax dollars are paying for this. And we ask, what are we going to do? I think we go to the Declaration of Independence, this clarity that when a government no longer serves us, we have a right to form a new government. And so that's what I like about another intention of our New View group. We're talking about new economics. We're talking about how you found a government on a fair economy that doesn't have wealth distribution, that has fair money and fair taxes and for fair land system. So we need to find a way that our own culpability for supporting our criminal government, how we can end that. And I say we break and we stop paying money to the federal government to do what we know is wrong and criminal. And that is a big step. And I think we need to announce it. We need to build that movement. And did some of you see any of the CPAC lectures, the talks? Yes. Tulsi Gabbard was in there. And I managed to watch Ted Cruz. Now, Ted Cruz is really high up in the Republican Party, right? He almost was the candidate for president. And I never thought a whole lot about him. I never, thought real favorably about him. But when I listened to what Ted Cruz said at CPAC, I was stunned. He's talking about, we got to go against big. And he said big government. He said big business. He said big media. He had a whole list. And he said we have to decentralize. That's a key. Decentralized. We have to
Yes.
have local economy, local control, local empowerment, and that means to shrink, literally shrink the size of the federal government and to have it as a right, a human right of conscience, not to pay for what we believe is wrong.
Well,
Right.
you know,
Taxes.
I would like to comment here that something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, which is with today's media, you know, and the internet and the ability to inform people very widely about policies and programs, etc. We have reached the point really where we could have voting on the various proposals that are presented to the Congress. And I want to point out that many of these proposals, in fact, as I understand it, most of them are actually written by lobbyists. And then there are massive proposals, 5,000 pages, and they throw into these riders that have nothing to do with the core theme of the proposal. And they have 48 hours or something ridiculous to read through pile of paper, or maybe it's digital, and who can do that in 48 hours, even with a 5 people or 10 people on your staff? However, and this part here I think is super interesting in terms of the possibilities it offers. And there's a woman, Dr. Jane McGonigal, who wrote a book called Reality is Broken. And she is calling for she's the first person who got a PhD in computer gaming. And her thesis is that reality as it's structured in terms of political, economic, and the various other systems of society are broken. Those systems are broken. And that we can learn a lot from the way computer games are designed to redesign society and incorporate more gaming type techniques into the way we design society. She gives a fabulous example. I believe it's in chapter 11 of Reality is Broken, where she gives an example of how The Guardian hired a game designer when about 5 weeks into this great expose that parliamentarians were cheating on their expense accounts. It took the game designer a week to design a multiplayer online game, and in about a month, they went through over 1 million receipts that were stored in a computer in a basement that they discovered, okay? And they couldn't do keyword searches because these were little PDFs, so little images, but they divided them out, and they had 20,000 gamers sign up in 3 days, and they had gone through a third of the receipts by then. By the end of the month, or maybe it was 5 weeks, they unpacked all the receipts and figured out, they made it a game. And they ended up busting a whole bunch of parliamentarians, gotten millions of pounds back. A number of them had to resign. I think several went to prison, and it worked. So if we think of that today with COVID, in a way, if you look at what's going on out in the world, it's kind of like we've got a game going on already, but we can design it better as we think of it as a game and look at some rewards and incentives maybe to, make this more fun. Anyway, that's just a thought that has been rattling around in my brain a whole bunch recently. Anyone want to comment on anything else here? And
Ellen's hands up.
Great.
Well, I've often thought of how we could all participate in our decisions that are made by our politicians. But the problem is, if you put it up to the people, it's still the media that's going to win the battle. I mean, what if you say, should we be in Ukraine or shouldn't we? Right now, how are the people going to vote? Obviously, they're going to vote the way the TV goes, because most people are TV watchers. So whoever controls the narrative on TV will still be voting, controlling the vote. And so then I've tried to think through, well, maybe you should put certain qualifications, like you can only, first you have to pass a test to see if you understand certain things, and then you can vote. But I just don't see how you could put it up to the
I saw
people
Marilyn's hand
collectively.
next.
Marilyn.
Yeah, it just gets back to the theme that's been, pushed for quite a long time. We've got to get the money. Number one, get the money out of politics.
Right.
Because the politicians are all bought. The media is bought. The media is going to, the mass media is going to project information and indoctrinate people in a certain way. And it all revolves, somebody said it's all about the money. That's so true. We have to decentralize the capital, the money. We've got to take the super rich, bring them down, take away a bunch of their assets. They can still live in luxury, but they have so much beyond that. Take away their decision and control and political power that comes with their money. Bring up the wealth of the poorer people. Equalize that. And I know Alanna has a lot of ideas on how to do that. But as long as you have a class of people that control the bulk of the world's wealth, they're gonna buy off the media. Fortunately, humans are smart enough that some of us see through that, and there will always be those that see through that, and there are mass movements here and there that see through the hype. But we got to keep pushing to get rid of those gross inequalities and the concentration of wealth and power.
Yeah, Ginger, I saw.
I agree with that so totally, and that has been a big major focus for me, is to figure out how do we reach people to unify the people. But the people have to unify. Those of us here in this group are able to pick and choose what is considered right wing or left wing or whatever, and find go beyond the paradox of right wing and left wing to find the perspective which has all people in it. And this concept, of course, is something that only comes to people who have the time or take the time or whatever it is to actually think about it and think about, well, how do we get there? The thing is to mobilize the people who are now ferociously divided. Like you're either pro-vax or anti-vax now, and or you're pro-Ukraine or an anti-Putin, or you're pro-Putin if you're an anti-Ukraine. So it's like everything is made extreme. In order to find a way to galvanize the people, we've got to have the people come together. It's got to be grassroots, because of course, if we have people at the top trying to create a great reset like Schwab and the World Economic Forum, these people are already multi-billionaires and they got all the money and everything. So everything they're going to do is going to just give them more money. It's like they just promote through all the media this hegemony of a philosophy about life and so on, that everybody all the way down to the bottom thinks applies to them and doesn't. So people have been kind of brainwashed into the philosophy of that these big corporations of America are what makes America great. And it's like my mother used to say, what's good for GM is good for the country. But she'd always say it with a little sadness, like she wished it wasn't that way, but it obviously was that way.
And she heard that on TV too.
Yeah, it was a kind of a slogan way back there in the 50s or whatever it was. But it's the whole empire, American empire, is a business empire, really. It's a money empire. And to force everyone to use the dollar, force everyone to adhere to an American hegemony, which is corporate in its thinking, and it's a business thing. It's a for-profit concept that only works for the top. So the question then is, how do we bridge the gap between left and right, or pro and con, and good and bad, and right and wrong, and all this duality? How do we find a common ground for people to—
That might be a really good segue if we're going to go ahead and have me do the presentation today, because it's going to take another 10 or 15 minutes to do my presentation, and I hope we can just stay on for it.
Okay, because your presentation really follows this very well.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest then that we table for today what's going on in the COVID world and how, the distraction there and what's going on, the information that's coming out. And let's just jump right into your presentation, Alanna.
Okay, great. And I'll preface it with the metaphor I like to use, which is the crack in the Liberty Bell. When our country was formed, we formed a political democracy. Even that was imperfect, as we know, but more and more Everybody got enfranchised to be able to vote. But we brought over the economic system of the Europe around land tenure and money systems, and it has caused the horrible maldistribution of wealth that's really now destroying our political democracy. And one way we're certainly kept divided is this right, left, Republican, Democrat, two sides ball game that's always going on, and people have to take sides. So this document clarifies how we can have a fair, free market. Fairness is a value from the left, freedom is a value from the right. The two can harmonize and be synergistic if we get clear about property rights. And this is a big picture clarity put together by those who were members of the International Union for Land Value Taxation and their international meeting in 1946. So this is called an International Declaration on Individual and Common Rights to Earth. Right there, you see it's transcending the left, which wants to make things common and socialize, and the right that wants to privatize everything. Right in the title, there's the harmonic that we are individual and we are community. The individual and the community harmonic is what we're talking about looking at property rights. So we hereby declare that the earth is the common heritage of all, and that all people have natural and equal rights to the land of the planet. By the term land is meant all natural resources, water, air, all natural resources in classical economics is under the term land. It's all that is nature given. Subject always to these natural and equal rights in land and to this common ownership, individuals can and should enjoy certain subsidiary rights in land. These rights properly enjoyed by individuals are the right to secure exclusive occupation of land, the right to exclusive use of land occupied, the right to the free transfer of land according to the laws of the country, the right to transmit land by inheritance. An example, I have a piece of paper that says I own a house and a lot of land. That means if I want to have a garden in my backyard, I'm free to plant what I want in my garden because it's my right. And that is my right to put that garden in and to eat those vegetables that I grow. And nobody should take that away. So these individual rights do not include, and see if I can scroll through the document, do not include the right to use land in a manner contrary to the common good, for example, in such a manner as to destroy or impair the common heritage. Now, I shouldn't be putting poisonous toxic substances on my land that can leak into the air and water and land of others. Okay. Second, the individual rights do not include the right to appropriate what economists call the economic rent of land. This is the key concept. What is economic rent? What is land rent? That is sort of the crux of the matter around defining individual and common rights to land. This was a big deal in classical economics. Who should get this land rent? But I tell you folks, we have a corruption in economics that happened early in the 1900s, whereby the big money powers that be created neoliberal or neoclassical, the neocons you've heard of, neoliberals. And that economy made land, which is a term for the earth itself, a mere subset of capital. And from the three factors of land, earth, labor, and capital, which are tools of production. We're not talking money system here. We're talking tangibles, land, labor, and capital. That was a classical economics. It was gaining a headway to how we address wealth inequality. And of course, the very super rich are going to pay more because they actually own more of the land and resources that they privatize. So they created schools of economics. They took out the term earth or land, and they made two factors, labor and capital. So I call it the intellectual crime of the 1900s. Okay, the economic rent is the annual value attached to the land alone, apart from any improvements thereupon created by labor. This value is created by the existence of and the functioning of the whole community wherein the individual lives. And isn't justice the property of the community? To allow this value to be appropriated by individuals enables land to be used not only for the production of wealth, but as an instrument of oppression of human by human, leading to severe social consequences, which are everywhere evident. So the two main dynamics of the land problem. One is that very few own most of the actual land and resources. In, say, Maine and Florida, 1%, last I checked, of the people own 2/3 of the private land. And you can go
Wow.
state by state, and you can see by the numbers, which are very rarely published, that very few own most of the private land in the United States. Now, the second and even more important aspects of the land problem is that as production proceeds, as there's actually more wealth created, the land values increase faster than the return to wages. The income from production does not increase as fast as this land value or land rent increases. Now, what that's causing is why we cannot have a market economy work for affordable housing for all. And since most of what a working person, no matter what kind of work they do, mental or physical labor, most of what they earn is going to go to the house purchase or to renting a place to live. So since the land value increases faster than the housing, faster than the house, then you have to go to the mortgage companies and you have to take a loan from a bank in order to buy a place to live on this earth. And that mortgage payment then increases ever more above, again, the ability of wages to pay for housing. So we're almost finished with this part. I've been taking little asides here. We're almost finished with the declaration. All humans have natural and equal rights in land. Those rights may be exercised in two ways: by holding land as individuals, okay, you have your private land title, or sharing in the common use of the economic rent of land. Okay, so say you are a renter. Well, we can use taxation policies so that you also, as a renter, share in this land value. The economic rent of land of the community. Okay, the economic rent of land can be collected for the use of the community by methods similar to those by which real estate taxes are now collected. That is what is meant by the policy of land value taxation. Were this community created land value, which is a commons, this is the commons, collected, the many, scrolling down, the many taxes which impede the production of wealth and limit purchasing capacity could be abolished. What we're talking about here is your tax on your house, your tax on your labor income, your tax on your small business, your sales tax for just exchanging and trading goods. The exercise of both common and individual rights in land is essential to a society based on justice, but the rights of individuals and natural resources are limited by the just rights of the community. Denying the existence of common rights in land creates a condition of society wherein the exercise of individual rights becomes impossible for the great mass of the people. How many rights do you have when you're a homeless person living in the street? And we know California being like the 6th wealthiest country on earth, if it was a country, the wealth inequality and the homeless is growing. Proposition 13 that limited the property tax. And we knew, those of us who study this, that California was headed down the tubes. And we knew this in 1978. So we therefore declare that the earth is the birthright of all people. That's it. That's what we need. We don't have this in political democracy. We don't have our birthright to the planet itself not affirmed by principle, policy, or by law. And what we're living in is absolutely against natural law to have the kind of privatization of the earth that we have. Okay, thanks for listening.
Yeah,
My
thank you,
sister.
Alanna.
Thanks, Alanna.
Any questions to ask Alanna?
That was great presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do you have any way to, I mean, do you have a group of people yet who are going to activate this in
Well,
any
you
way?
notice on the bottom here, and this has been, okay, Henry George was a political economist in the
Would you scroll
1900s.
down then? Let's see. Oh,
Okay,
okay.
do you see there's a website, the
Okay.
IU.org, the International Union for Land Value Taxation. You can sign up for that. Norie presented last week on the best game on earth. Under resources is the best game on earth. So we can all really build a movement together, local to global, for all the good things and the clarity we have as to the way forward for a world of peace and justice for all. So this has been a movement since 100 years plus. Henry George ran for, after his great work, Progress and Poverty, he became very famous. You know, he was as famous as Mark Twain and Edison was at that time period. But he was deliberately, talk about repression and censorship. He was dropped out of the public dialogue because he got in the movement that was with his ideas got to be too strong and powerful. He ran for mayor of New York twice. But this movement has continued on. The Henry George Schools of Social Science have kept the education about it alive, because economists in our universities, if they ever even hear Henry George, they're going to hear something pejorative, like how he was a 1800s guy that talked about the need for land reform or something. Totally doesn't get how relevant this economics is today. And then in my work over the decades with it, and others, we've seen that this is not just Henry George's idea. He simply rediscovered an idea and approach that goes back thousands of years, literally. And I like to call it the golden thread of perennial wisdom teachings on land. And we've traced not only the principle, but even the land value tax policy back to the Vedic tradition of the Indus River Valley, one of the great civilizations in Western India, from 6,000 years ago, had this sort of policy in place. And then we can look at China and other places as they rise and fall based on how much the society is based on this common law, this natural law of fairly sharing the earth. And that is where we get the unity consciousness. We are one human family. We are all connected. For my family to do well, your family has to do well. We have to have the basic principles of earth sharing in place. So yeah, it has a deep, deep history. Right now, I'm doing a compilation on Jubilee justice from the biblical Judeo-Christian tradition of debt cancellation and land rights and George's economics. So I'm doing a compilation on that, and we're going to be working then to get the religious institutions onto this.
Alanna, you want to take down the document so we can see you talking?
Sure.
On the
Okay.
screen? I wanted to ask you, are you or the people in the group that you're working with, are you working on any kind of, say, a platform for, say, a presidential campaign, or some kind of a document or way of organizing at the local level, at the state level?
Yeah, we have several organizations in the United States. We have Common Ground USA, and there's Common Ground chapters in most regions of the United States. And then we have the Council of Georgia's organizations that has a conference every year. This year it will be in Albany, New York, but a lot of it will be on Zoom. So you can go to those websites. I'm engaged with a great team of about 9 or 10 of us, and we have a project called Baltimore Thrive. And because this tax policy is best begun on the local level with a shift in the property tax, and then a shift off of labor and capital of all the other taxes that the city has. We want to start it strong, get our cities working, and then work to get the taxes from flowing into Washington, D.C. for the military industrial media complex and all those bad things that Washington's doing. We want to build that movement to understand the tax policy so that we stop sending our dollars to be used for ways we don't want, and to keep the dollars local, and to get the local economy going through a fair, free market to address the housing affordability and the homelessness problem. So in Baltimore Thrive, we're working with the state legislature for an enabling bill. We've been having on our Zoom calls members of the city council, journalists, grassroots leaders, And we're really building, and I think a very strategic, clever way how to get this. And we focus on one city that really needs help, that really can be a model city for this. But then there are other cities in the world, in Pennsylvania, who've done this to some degree. And I could go on and on about the positive effects of this, but I won't today.
There's one other thing that comes to mind. Years ago, maybe 2 decades ago, you gave a talk up at the Chautauqua in New York and invited me to come along with you. And then after that, we went to a Georgist meeting in Philadelphia. And for the first time, I saw the original Monopoly game that was on in the one of those glass shelves or whatever. And one of the things that I had not known that the game of Monopoly was designed by a woman Georgist to show what happens when you have Monopoly. And it was an absolutely amazing teaching tool. However, she, I think, sold it to Parker Brothers for something ridiculous like $500, which back then must have seemed like a lot. And I remember looking somewhere around that time to see how many copies of Monopoly had been sold. And it was something like 90 million. And that was 20 years ago. So what I would say is it might be a very interesting challenge to put out to the groups you're working with. And I mean, I'm certainly would be very happy to play with this, to design an add-on to the Monopoly game where what happens when everybody has been kicked off the board, has lost everything.
Let me explain, Norie. Let me explain. This woman was Elizabeth McGee. She was a Quaker and a Georgist, and she started this folk game to demonstrate how the Monopoly grows. And that's why you have Park Place and other streets in Atlantic City, how Monopoly grows. And then how the second way you play the game was what you're talking about, Norie, was how we play a game where there's a fair distribution of wealth, which is based on Henry George's economic proposals. Now, I'm not so sure.
Did she design a game that did that?
Yeah, with the second way to play rules, exactly what you're talking. And now our South Korean Georgists have actually issued and have published a new game which has those rules, those Georgist economics rules, and others have worked on this. So yeah, it's available, it's there. I think the cool thing is to really get it into electronics and computerize the game and so on. And I guess what we're doing now is having land value maps that show who owns what land where, how much is it worth, how much do they pay in taxes, and how much would they pay when we shift to a land value based taxes. And then we start playing that game for real in our localities.
Yeah.
It's playing it for real.
There's a Dutch sociologist some years ago, this was pointed out to me when I gave a talk about the best game on earth, actually in Baltimore, came up after my talk and said he wanted to tell me about this Dutch sociologist who had written a book about how games are very effective for training civilizations. So I would say that since a lot of people have Monopoly in their closet and pull it out from time to time, that maybe having an actual add-on that people can buy, which becomes a source of income, might not be a bad idea.
Well, I think we could just model it after what the South Korean Georgists have already done. Like I said, they published a game that does that. We just need to put it in English. But I want to tell you something really important, and then I think we'll quit for my part. In looking at these videos on what's happening in Ukraine, there was a video made by like a teenager with her friends in a basement. And it starts with those kids at a table playing the Monopoly game. Yeah.
Well, the game is still being played. It really is. I mean, I've had people comment about, I played Monopoly the other night, I got creamed or whatever. So I really think that could be a very neat wedge for getting it out on a broad scale. Because if 20 years ago you had 90 million Monopoly sets sold, that was in Parade magazine, by the way, that I read that. Then today, there are probably a whole bunch of people who are still playing Monopoly. Okay, so let's ride on that tiger.
Maybe in 6 weeks or so, after others have given presentations, we can focus on this again. But I think it's probably time that we wrap up, frankly.
Okay, so anyway, shall we? Want to make a last comment to finish off?
Or announcements?
or announcements? Okay, well, ladies, thank you so much for sharing the new view. Let's
Thank
put
you.
that into the world and invite more people to come in and help make it a richer conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.